and follow up and see this on your own, to experience the work of Common and the artists that he works with. Thank you, Stephanie. So how are you? By definition, art evokes different thoughts and feelings in each of us. And this art, this video, I actually first saw performed, actually ritualized within a grimy prison gym in stark prison cells, empty, with bars around and above. This video stirs my grief, not only for the violence and the death that brings us to this moment, but for the violence against Black people, transgender people, indigenous peoples, and anyone deemed other. Letter to the Free, which is what we just saw, stirs my overwhelm and my desire and my hope and my understanding that we are called to witness and respond. So how are you? Have you been able in this time of COVID to lend a hand or your feet or your voice in support of Black organizers for freedom? Are you a Black or brown leader organizing for freedom and to abolish police brutality and mass imprisonment of Black and brown people? This being the current focus that rallies the masses now. It is right that some of us must step back to care for ourselves or others. Some of us must witness, others pass us by, and then we follow them with our prayers, our best wishes, and sometimes with our fear. How are you? Have you been able to write letters, make phone calls, send money, engage a real conversation to grow understanding between people who just don't understand? Have you felt how each small action can help turn some of this fear into possibility? Because it can. Have you marched? Have you called meetings yourself? Each of us is called upon to discern our own part. This uprising for freedom is a time different from other times, in part because so many are rising to follow the lead of thousands of gifted, inspired Black and brown people. And Black and brown leaders have been organizing and training young Black and brown leaders for a very long time to prepare for just this time. Our Unitarian Universalist president, Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, is a self-described white abolitionist. She became an abolitionist in Phoenix, Arizona, as she witnessed brutal police violence directed at migrants this time. As an abolitionist, she wants to stop the criminalization and imprisonment of Black and brown people because that is the enslavement of our day. I am grateful for our faith leader who says systems of policing and criminalization in this country are inherently violent, steeped in and created to reinforce white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and racialized control. Remembering back on the music video from Common, A Letter to the Free, the first viewing of it, and you can imagine it, are empty prisons, no inmates, but haunted by centuries of domination of Black-skinned people. We Unitarian Universalists are being called to witness that history of vile domination and to respond. Our denomination is calling for the end of criminalization of Black and Brown people because that is what the Black and Brown leadership understands to be what is necessary today. That is where they're leading us. And they are calling for an end. We are calling for an end to preparing and arming police as if they were fighting the people ourselves as enemies. I feel called not only by Reverend Susan, but by many Unitarian Universal leaders. And so speak today about what a faithful Unitarian Universalist response to evil might be. Our faith tradition historically upholds the goodness of humanity and the dignity and worth of every person. It was very radical in its time in the 18th century and 19th centuries for holding such beliefs. But while that principle of goodness and individual worthiness of a person, while those principles focus on the individual agency, we are a covenantal community together. We gather by choice and with intention to work towards open communities of truth-telling, of respect, of beauty, and of meaning. So a UU faithful response would need to honor individual choice, yes. Wholeness and well-being of the individual, yes. But it seems to me a UU faithful response must go beyond individual prayer, generosity, and action. I believe a UU faithful response must be carried out in our covenant. We move together by covenant through conflict and disagreement toward collective action for the greater good. That is our way. It's right in your congregational affirmation said every time you gather for worship, inspired by love. Our mission is to seek our true nature, connect openly and deeply, and act for justice. In covenant, which is way beyond contractual ways of being. In covenant, we agree how we will be with one another. We agree and know that we will fail. And then we agree that we will keep working on it again and again. That's part of being faithful and responding faithfully. Learning to live what we say we believe is a worthy purpose for a life, certainly for my life. I believe learning to live what we say we believe is an especially worthy purpose for a faith community such as this. And you each have experience making your way in an intentional community, especially in this community called the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley. You know it is not simple. And when something arises that is so important that it threatens what we most value here, that is when the practice of acting on covenant and reflecting on how we have done together and then practicing again, that is a praxis. It's a spiritual praxis, and it's critical. Hold before you your highest collective intention. Commit to staying at the table with one another to figure it out. This in balance with deep self-care. Staying at the table can scorch our hearts, as so many of us have been, I guess, we've been deprived of the skills to engage conflict. So we make conflict together the opportunity to return to covenant. So we ask for help to learn it. We accept it as a time to learn because we know we need conflict in order to thrive and to be more deeply rooted, more resilient in a difficult world. Conflict is part of the praxis of beloved community. It's certainly part of a faithful preparation to respond to evil. It's worth our time to struggle through because we as individuals are worthy of such love and care as we work for in covenant. We as individuals and community are worthy of living with such high purpose It's worth our time to struggle through, because with the conflicts in our larger communities and nations, we need to show up to truly help. We need to build skills, to train ourselves to show up well. Covenantal, faithful work in community can help us prepare to show up and respond to evil. Learning to expect and grow through conflict, we begin also to build our skills beyond the reactivity of fighting or flying away or freezing through the daily horror of so many violent and traumatizing images that we all witness, and that we witness the pain in community, experiencing so much suffering. We school ourselves, breathe, listen, care for one another, and learn together what we are together called to do in response, and then act. Try not to turn away from the chaos and powerful urgency of these uprisings. We breathe, we wait and listen, we care for one another, we learn together, and we act. The mantra by Larry Ward, the Dharma teacher: stand up in the house of belonging, and we breathe. Take your seat at the table of healing and transformation, and we breathe. Ride the winds of change, unafraid, and we breathe. But of course I'm afraid, and there's room for that, to feel it, to know fear, and together build our resilience to move despite and perhaps even with the fear. We can work towards a Unitarian Universalist, faithful, covenantal response to evil. Isaiah is the name of an interfaith, nonpartisan collaboration in Minnesota. They've been working together to end racism for a long time. A couple of days ago, I read an email blast from Isaiah. It writes, "This is what we face. The right-wing extremists escalated their campaign to create chaos in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They used arson as a primary tactic. It was an escalation from their work to encourage looting on Wednesday night in particular. They are using the widespread and justifiable demonstrations of grief about George Floyd as a vehicle to advance their political agenda. They have launched an organized effort to manipulate public perception, deconstruct public infrastructure, and create mistrust and fear." End of quote from Isaiah. I call evil words that are repeated and patterns of actions that are repeated, whose intentions are to sever connection to that to which we inherently belong. I call evil that which denies our connection to that which we name as whole, beloved, sacred, the ground of our being. Violent domination will do that. Criminalizing and incarcerating people in huge numbers will do that. Will sever so many from their lifeblood of family and community interdependence. I chose to use the word evil because I need ways to grapple with the immensity of what we witness. The word evil shakes me out of an instinct to run away or smash whatever I can. The word evil shakes me to my core, shakes me into recognizing that I actually have to call on my core to face this. I cannot let a sense of overwhelm or fear And I speak here as a white person of privilege. I cannot let cynicism or helplessness allow me to turn away from the powerful urgency of these uprisings. As I was learning about the artist called Common, I watched him on the National Public Radio tiny desk. It's a personal connection around music. He invited the famous artist Andra Day to sing with the group. Almost in passing, describing why she sang a particular piece, she said, "It's not hopeless. It just brings out the best in us." It's not hopeless. It just brings out the best in us. Somehow those words shocked me. When did I learn that adversity will break me? Along with years of my growing, along the years of my growing, how did it benefit someone somewhere, maybe helped sell me something to lead me to believe that if it's hopeless, I'm not going to try? As a white middle-class person, I've had to struggle with the impulse not to risk if I can't be sure of winning. Andra Day, singing for Black liberation, said, and I quote, "It's not hopeless. It just brings out the best in us. And I have to return to my core and breathe." Our Unitarian Universalist Association President, Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Dray, again says, "The realities of policing and anti-Blackness in our country, in our congregations, and in ourselves are urgent for everyone to interrogate and understand. Don't turn away from the challenge and the truth of the uprisings. It matters that we support the uprisings whose goal is the liberation of Black people and communities who for too long have been crushed by white supremacy, militarism, and capitalism. We must find the sources within ourselves to give us courage in this moment, to resist, to risk, to sacrifice for this moment and this movement that needs all of us to succeed, to be midwives," she continues, "for the new era in which all of us will be free." End quote. And I say, I see, I know our congregations can become midwives as we do our work to return to covenant again and again and live with purpose and beauty. By doing our internal work for covenant, we mature, we deepen, we become less afraid, we become more resilient. We prepare ourselves, and with our faith up front, we show up for the greater good when we are called. And now we are called. Executive Vice President Carrie McDonald, as people of faith and conscience, we are called to practice active remembrance, a remembrance in pursuit of liberation in response to systemic violence. He invites us to do this in 4 ways. You can see it on the website. Truth-telling. Name the ways anti-Blackness shows up in and around us. It would be hypocritical, he writes, to say Black Lives Matter, but then refuse to acknowledge anti-Blackness in oneself, one's family, and communities, and congregations. 2, actively build a better way. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for responding to the taking down of the Black Lives Matter flag and putting it back up. And now is a good time to think about what it is that you as a community committed yourselves to when you hung that banner. It is time to return to that promise and look at what that promise guides you to do now. Look at that promise and ask if it is enough. And if so, activate that promise and make it real. The UUA specifically asks our congregations and other places of worship to develop alternatives to calling the police. It's one way to stop contributing to the anti-Black system of policing. Third, resistance. Follow the lead of Black organizers. We are called to respond to evil by believing the truth of Black leadership, by lifting up, supporting, and following Black leadership working for liberation. And fourth, take action in support of Black lives. This is big. And to encourage us along, Reverend Meg Riley writes, and she is a white UU minister living in Minneapolis. Here are her words. What I can see that gives me the heart to continue around here is that things are moving. Local activism has been incredible, reminding me why I love this city with all its problems. The Minneapolis school system voted to stop having cops in them, something youth has been advocating for years and years. The University of Minneapolis has said they won't use the Minneapolis Police Department for sporting events anymore. The state of Minnesota has filed civil rights charges against the MPD. And the on-the-ground activism has been incredible, she reminds me, why she says, writing, this reminds me why I love this city. Activists have turned an abandoned hotel into housing for homeless people and have been feeding those who have been left without access to grocery stores and restaurants. The American Indian movement has been doing street patrols in Minneapolis, and that has led to the protection of many businesses and people. She asks, as you discern steps to take where you are now, ways to move forward, may the complexities of this situation not cause you to give up. Believe and support leadership by Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and do what you can where you are. Thank you, Meg. Even though people for all time have resisted oppression without reason for hope, it does help me to hear hopeful news. And so I take heart. I encourage you all, my friends and colleagues in Unitarian Universalism, be faithful, be covenantal in your response to evil. Ms. Page, her last name is Ingram, is a Unitarian Universalist young adult chosen by the association to work on the UU the Vote campaign, which is what your offering is being divided to share today. Ms. Page was sent to Minneapolis to organize, to get marginalized people registered and to the polls this year. She's been there for months. She spoke at the How We Thrive gathering, a Unitarian Universalist gathering of over 10,000 people online after the murder of George Floyd. She described Minneapolis as being under military occupation. She spoke of the intense and constant organizing on the streets, and she asked us to seriously consider something. She said that when we qualify the word protest with the word peaceful, we are actually buying into and promoting the false narrative that the looters are the real problem. When I say peaceful protest, as opposed to supporting the protests, I encourage the false narrative that lets people focus on looters as the problem rather than on white supremacy and police violence. Now that shook me up. It got my attention because I'm trained in nonviolent direct action. And she said, the enemy is not the looters. She said, we know who the enemy is. So growing up white and privileged, I know I will need to keep learning the ways racism infects how I see and how I think. And I am so excited, electrified, actually, to be able to join people who rise for their liberation. Even in my limited way, as I stay home and care for my family, our liberation is tied together. Interrogating the racism in me echoes my experience of my faith home, my UU base, where I am learning constantly to go, to let go of one way of thinking in favor of honoring and respecting another and building beloved community. The artist Common also won a Grammy, I think. He won acclaim for the song Glory with John Legend. It was the centerpiece for the movie Selma. In this song, it says, "One day when the glory comes, it will be ours. The war is not over, victory is not won, but we'll fight until the finish, until it's all done. And then we'll cry glory." And then Common says, "The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just is not specific enough." I want to follow the inspired Black leaders of our time, don't you? I am excited and yes, scared. I'm figuring out how to balance my well-being and self-care at this stage of my life with the invitation to join people who rise for the liberation. Interrogating racism in ourselves and our congregations and larger communities is part of what being a covenantal community is right now. And the blessing of our faith community includes many leaders of color, skillful in strategy and resource creating, and committed to being in covenantal community with all of us and willing to rise for liberation of Black and brown people. Our Black and brown leaders are marking a path. None of us has to figure it out alone. Over the next months, you can choose, if you are able and willing, to work together using the many excellent resources on our website. Continue to come together in web-based groups, choose the resources, and go deeper together. Deepen the strength of your faith, of our faith. Your central meaning is deepened. Your essence is deepened. And in so doing, we strengthen our resilience as people and as community. In so doing, we bring our faith community and our gifts to the world for freedom. Freedom come, freedom come. Hold on. It won't be long. May it be so. Thank you. And the closing words again from artist Andra Day. It's not hopeless. It just brings out the best in us. May it be so for us all. And our closing hymn is Side with Love. It was